The silence in a first-class cabin is a sacred thing, a carefully curated bubble of peace bought and paid for. But on American Airlines Flight 100 from JFK to London, that silence was about to be shattered. What started as a dispute over overhead bin space would escalate into a shocking public confrontation. You're about to hear the story of Caroline Hayes, a woman who demanded a black grandmother go back to economy where you belong, and the incredible dignified response from Dr. Eleanor Vance that didn't just silence Caroline, it grounded her life. This isn't just a story about airplane drama. It's a story of hidden power, quiet dignity, and the kind of swift, brutal karma that you have to see to believe. The first-class cabin of American Airlines Flight 100 was an oasis of forced calm. The scent of warm towels, a hint of expensive perfume, and the low, polite murmur of seasoned travelers filled the air. It was a world of brushed metal soft leather and the unspoken agreement that everyone present belonged there. Dr. Eleanor Vance, a woman of 72, with eyes that held the quiet wisdom of 1,000 history books, settled into her seat, 2A. Her silver hair was styled in an elegant low bun, and her charcoal gray cashmere travel suit spoke of timeless taste, not fleeting trends. She was a retired professor of American history from Columbia University, a woman who had spent her life dissecting the very fabric of the nation's conflicts and triumphs. Today, however, she was simply a grandmother flying to London to celebrate her granddaughter's 10th birthday. She placed her small leather satchel under the seat in front of her and retrieved a well-worn copy of a book on Renaissance art, its pages soft with use. The fragile piece was first disturbed by a flurry of motion and a voice that sliced through the quietude. "Mark, for God's sake, be careful with that. That's the Chloe bag." The Chloe. Caroline Hayes, a woman in her late 30s, strode into the cabin as if she owned it. Dressed head to toe in blindingly white designer athleisure wear, her face was a taut mask of expensive skincare and perpetual dissatisfaction. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled back into a severe ponytail, and her French manicured nails clicked impatiently on the screen of her iPhone. Behind her, her husband Mark, a man who looked perpetually apologetic, struggled with 2 oversized, jewel-toned roller bags. Caroline gestured dismissively toward the overhead bin above seat 2D, directly across the aisle from Dr. Vance. "Just put them up there, Mark, and hurry up. I need to take a pre-flight mimosa pic for my followers. The lighting is fading." Mark, sweating slightly under the pressure, hoisted the first bag. It was heavy and awkward. As he tried to shove it into the compartment, he bumped the small, soft-sided bag Dr. Vance had placed there earlier. It was her coat and a small pillow. "Excuse me." Dr. Vance said, her voice calm and measured. She didn't look up from her book. "I believe my coat is in there. If you could just be a bit more careful." Caroline's head snapped towards her. Her eyes, the color of a pale winter sky, narrowed. "It's an overhead bin, not a personal closet. It's for bags." She didn't address Dr. Vance directly, but spoke about her as if she weren't there. "Some people don't understand the etiquette of first class." Mark, mortified, adjusted the bags and quickly closed the bin. "Sorry about that," he muttered in Dr. Vance's general direction before scurrying into his seat 2F. Caroline plopped into her seat 2D and immediately began a loud, one-sided conversation on her phone. "Jessica, you will not believe the security line. An absolute nightmare. No, of course we're in first. I'd rather cancel the trip than fly commercial. Yes, the London deal. If I can close this Knightsbridge property, it'll be a record commission. Mark's company is footing the bill for the flight, of course. It's the least they can do after that pathetic bonus he got." Every word was a performance delivered at a volume intended for the entire cabin to hear. She was curating her image in real time, successful, important, and utterly intolerant of any inconvenience. Dr. Vance turned a page in her book, outwardly serene, but a lifetime of observation had taught her to recognize the brittle insecurity beneath such displays. She had seen this type of person before, in boardrooms, at faculty meetings, and in the pages of the history she taught. Individuals whose sense of self-worth was so fragile, it had to be constantly reinforced by belittling others. A flight attendant, a young man named Liam, with a kind but nervous smile, came by to offer pre-departure beverages. "I'll have a mimosa," Caroline snapped, not bothering to make eye contact. "And make sure it's with decent champagne, not that cheap Prosecco you sometimes try to pass off." "Of course, ma'am," Liam said, his smile tightening. He turned to Dr. Vance. "And for you, ma'am." "I would love a glass of sparkling water with a slice of lime, thank you, Liam," she said, reading his name tag, and offering a warm, genuine smile that seemed to momentarily ease his tension. As Liam left, Caroline let out an exaggerated sigh. She turned to her husband, her voice a stage whisper that carried across the aisle. "Can you believe it? Some people get a free upgrade and think they own the place, probably using someone else's miles." Dr. Vance felt a familiar, weary ache. She had hoped for a peaceful flight, a quiet transition from one continent to another. But she could feel the storm clouds gathering. The air in the cabin was already thick with an unspoken animosity, a conflict simmering just below the surface, waiting for the slightest jostle to boil over. She took a slow, deep breath, centered herself, and focused on the intricate brushwork of a Botticelli painting in her book. She would not let this woman's bitterness spoil her journey. Not yet. The flight took off smoothly, a graceful ascent into the deepening twilight over New York City. The cabin lights dimmed, and the soft clinking of cutlery began as the meal service commenced. The orchestrated ballet of first-class service was designed to soothe and impress, but for Caroline Hayes, it was merely a series of opportunities for complaint. The warm nuts were not warm enough. The champagne, a respectable Bollinger, was not the vintage she preferred. The movie selection was, in her words, utterly pedestrian. With each perceived slight, her voice grew louder, her gestures more theatrical. Mark. Her husband sank lower in his seat, his face a permanent blush of second-hand embarrassment. Dr. Eleanor Vance ate her salmon quietly, her focus on her book, creating a small bubble of tranquility for herself. She had navigated far more treacherous waters than a turbulent first-class cabin. She had participated in sit-ins in the 60s, faced down hostile university committees in the 80s, and raised a son on her own to become a man of integrity and influence. A petulant woman in the seat across the aisle was a minor nuisance, a gnat to be ignored. The flashpoint came, as it so often does, over something trivial. Liam, the young flight attendant, was clearing Dr. Vance's tray. As he reached for her plate, the plane experienced a minor pocket of turbulence, a gentle but sudden dip. Liam stumbled, and a few drops of water from Dr. Vance's glass sloshed onto the plush carpet near Caroline's pristine white sneakers. It was only water, and it didn't even touch her. But Caroline recoiled as if she'd been struck. "Oh, for God's sake! Are you blind?" she shrieked, her voice cracking the cabin's calm. "Look what you've done! These are brand new Balenciagas. This is completely unacceptable." Liam froze his face, draining of color. "Ma'am, I am so sorry. It was just a bit of turbulence. It's only water. I can get a cloth right away. Only water. Do you know how much these shoes cost? More than your weekly salary, I imagine," Caroline sneered, turning her fury on the young man. Dr. Vance placed a calming hand on Liam's arm. "It's quite all right, Liam. It was an accident. It's nothing to be concerned about." She then looked directly at Caroline, her gaze steady and cool. "He has apologized. There is no need for such hysterics." That was the spark that ignited the inferno. Being defended by Dervance and being told to calm down was an affront Caroline's ego could not withstand. She saw Dr. Vance not as a fellow passenger, but as a symbol of everything she felt was beneath her. Caroline's face contorted into a mask of pure rage. She stood up, pointing a trembling, perfectly manicured finger at Dr. Vance. This is your fault. If you weren't here, none of this would have happened. I've been watching you since we boarded, acting all high and mighty." Her voice rose with each word, drawing the horrified stares of every other passenger. The cabin fell silent. The only sound, the hum of the engines and Caroline's shrill escalating tirade. "People like you are always the problem. You get a lucky break a handout, and you think you can just waltz in here and act like you belong. This is first class. It's for people who've earned it, not for... She trailed off, searching for the most cutting insult she could muster. Dr. Vance remained seated, her posture erect, her expression unreadable. She did not flinch. She simply watched the woman unravel. And then Caroline delivered the line that would echo across the internet and shatter her own life. "Why don't you just go back to economy where you belong? Go on. Get out. Go back to the back of the plane with the rest of them." The words hung in the air thick and poisonous. The racism thinly veiled until now was laid bare for all to see. A collective gasp went through the cabin. A man in seat 3A slowly lowered his newspaper, his eyes wide with shock. A woman in 1F, who had been asleep, sat bolt upright, and across the cabin a young man, a tech entrepreneur on his way to a conference, discreetly lifted his phone and began to record. Mark finally jolted from his stupor, grabbed his wife's arm. "Caroline, stop it. Sit down, for God's sake, what are you doing?" She shook him off. "I'm saying what everyone else is thinking. She doesn't belong here." The plane felt as if it were holding its breath. The flight attendants were frozen, unsure how to handle a passenger meltdown of this magnitude. The carefully constructed world of luxury and privilege had been torn open, exposing something ugly and raw. All eyes were now on the elderly black woman in seat 2A. They were waiting for a reaction. They expected tears, or shouting, or a call for help. They were not prepared for what Dr. Eleanor Vance did next. In the ringing silence that followed Caroline's outburst, Dr. Eleanor Vance did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She did not shrink into her seat. Instead, a profound stillness settled over her. She carefully placed her book on the empty seat beside her, folded her hands in her lap, and took one deliberate, calming breath. When she finally looked at Caroline, her eyes were not filled with anger or hurt, but with a deep, penetrating clarity, the look of a scholar about to dismantle a flawed and poorly constructed argument. "Ma'am," she began, her voice low, but carrying an astonishing weight of authority that cut through the tension. Every passenger leaned in, straining to hear. "You seem to be operating under a series of rather significant misapprehensions. Let us address them one by one, shall we?" The unexpected academic tone of her response was a splash of cold water. Caroline, who was primed for a shouting match, was momentarily thrown off balance. "First," Dr. Vance continued, her voice as smooth and unyielding as polished granite, "you have confused price with value and cost with worth. You believe that the ticket price for this seat affords you the right to behave without decency, without decorum, and without a fundamental respect for your fellow human beings. This is an error. The ticket purchases transportation and amenities, not a license for verbal assault. She paused, letting the words sink in. The other passengers were mesmerized. The young man's phone remained steady, recording every syllable. Second, you have made an assumption about my presence here, based on a set of prejudices that are as old as they are baseless. You look at my skin color and my age, and you construct a narrative in your head, a story of charity, of handouts, of someone being out of their proper place. You see me not as an individual, but as a symbol that disrupts your worldview. A worldview, I might add, that must be incredibly fragile if the mere presence of a 72-year-old black woman reading a book in seat 2A is enough to shatter it. Carolyn's face, which had been red with rage, was now pale with shock. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She was being dissected piece by piece with the precision of a surgeon. Third, and most importantly, Dr. Vance said, her gaze unwavering, you have instructed me to go back to economy. This is perhaps your most telling error. It reveals that in your mind, the world is a rigid hierarchy. There is a front for people like you and a back for people like me. You feel threatened because I have, by simply existing in this seat, violated that order. But let me be unequivocally clear, I am not in your way. I am not in your space. I am in seat 2A of a commercial airliner, a seat that I paid for with my own money earned over a 40-year career as an educator. She leaned forward just slightly, her voice dropping to an even quieter, more powerful register. You have not been inconvenienced. You have been confronted with a reality that you find intolerable. And for that, I am not the one who should apologize. Having delivered her response, Dr. Vance turned her attention away from the sputtering, speechless Caroline and looked toward Liam and another flight attendant, a senior purser named Sarah, who had rushed over during the commotion. Sarah, Dr. Vance said, her tone shifting from academic to calmly resolute, reading the purser's name tag instantly. This passenger has created a hostile and abusive environment. She has verbally assaulted a member of your crew and has targeted me with a tirade that was both racist and classist in nature. This is not a simple customer service issue. This is a matter of passenger safety and conduct. I am formally requesting that you and the captain handle this situation according to federal aviation regulations regarding passenger interference with the duties of a flight crew and threatening behavior towards other passengers. Her response hadn't been a snappy comeback. It had been a calm, logical, and devastatingly effective dismantling of Caroline's entire reality. She hadn't yelled. She had simply spoken the truth. And in doing so, she had done something far more effective than shouting back. She had seized complete control of the situation. The entire cabin was now her classroom, and everyone was listening. The plane, which had been a vessel of travel, was now a courtroom, and Dr. Eleanor Vance, without ever raising her voice, had just delivered the opening statement for the prosecution. The cabin wasn't just quiet anymore. It was shut down. Sarah the purser was a veteran of the skies. She had seen medical emergencies, drunken brawls, and panic attacks at 35,000 feet. She was trained to de-escalate, to soothe, to manage. But this was different. This wasn't a chaotic outburst. It was a calculated, hateful attack followed by a response of such intellectual and moral force that it left no room for simple platitudes. "Ma'am," Sarah said, addressing Caroline in a firm, no-nonsense tone, "please return to your seat immediately." "I'm not going anywhere until she is removed," Caroline shrieked, her composure cracking completely. "I am a Diamond Medallion member. I spend hundreds of thousands of dollars with this airline. You need to deal with her." "Caroline, please," Mark whispered, tugging at her sleeve, his face ashen. "Just sit down. You've done enough." "The passenger in seat 2A has done nothing to warrant removal," Sarah stated flatly. "You, however, have caused a major disturbance. Sit down now, or I will be forced to involve the captain, and we will discuss this on the ground." Faced with Sarah's unyielding authority, Caroline finally sank back into her seat, fuming. She crossed her arms, muttering about lawsuits and incompetent staff. She was still convinced her status would protect her. This was just a bump in the road, a moment of unpleasantness that would be smoothed over with apologies and a shower of bonus miles from the airline's corporate office. She fundamentally misunderstood the gravity of what she had done. Dr. Vance watched this exchange with a heavy heart. She knew that standard procedure, even when executed perfectly by a professional like Sarah, might not be enough. Airlines were corporations. They were often loath to alienate a high-value customer, even one as odious as Caroline Hayes. The result might be a temporary separation, a written warning, and a lifetime of resentment. Justice, she knew, often required more than just following the manual. With a quiet sigh, she reached into her satchel and pulled out her phone. The other passengers watched, curious. They assumed she was calling a family member to recount the story, or perhaps even a lawyer. She found the number in her contacts and pressed the call button. She held the phone to her ear, her expression patient. "David, darling, I'm sorry to bother you. I know it's late in London," she said softly, her voice a stark contrast to the venom that had filled the cabin moments before. The cabin remained silent. Everyone was listening. "I'm fine, my love. The flight is fine. Well, not entirely. We've had a bit of an incident." She paused, listening to the voice on the other end. No, I'm perfectly safe. It's just a rather unpleasant passenger has become verbally abusive, Doctor." Vance's eyes flickered over to Caroline, who was watching her with a contemptuous sneer, assuming this was all part of some pathetic act. "Yes, David, it was explicitly racist," Dr. Vance continued, her voice hardening almost imperceptibly. "She told me to go back to economy where I belong. The purser is handling it, but the woman is invoking her status with the airline, and I'm concerned it will be swept under the rug." Another pause. Dr. Vance listened intently. "Yes. American Airlines Flight 100. Seat 2A. Her name, I believe I heard her husband call her Caroline." The atmosphere in the cabin shifted. There was something in the calm, methodical way Dr. Vance was relaying the information that suggested this was not a casual complaint. This was a report. "Yes, darling, I understand," she said. "I'll let the purser know you'll be in touch. Please don't worry. I will see you and little Amelia in the morning. I love you." She ended the call and looked up at Sarah, who was standing nearby, keeping a watchful eye on Caroline. "Sarah," Dr. Vance said calmly. "The purser on this flight, correct?" "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied, a little taken aback by the directness. "You should be receiving a call from the ground very shortly. It will likely come from the captain's cockpit communications patched through from the AA Corporate Command Center," Dr. Vance explained, as if discussing the weather. "The call will be from David Vance. He is the CEO of Oratech." A flicker of recognition crossed Sarah's face. She knew the name. Oratech was not just any company. Oratech recently signed the largest exclusive corporate travel contract in American Airlines history. Dr. Vance stated the facts laid out like stones in a path. "It is a 10-year, 9-figure deal. David is my son." The final piece clicked into place. The sound was deafening. Mark Hayes, who worked in corporate finance, went rigid in his seat. His blood ran cold. Oratech. He knew Oratech. His company was a mid-level supplier for them. His entire career, his pathetic bonus, his very livelihood was tangentially connected to the man whose mother, his wife, had just publicly humiliated. Caroline, however, still didn't grasp the scale of the disaster. "So what?" she scoffed, though her voice now held a tremor of uncertainty. "You called your son. What's he going to do?" Dr. Vance didn't even look at her. She simply looked at Sarah and said, "I believe we will find out shortly." Less than 2 minutes later, the small light on the cabin intercom phone began to flash. Sarah answered it. She listened, her eyes widening. "Yes, Captain, I understand. Yes, completely. I'll inform them immediately." She hung up the phone, her face set like stone. The time for de-escalation was over. The unseen gears of immense corporate power had begun to turn, and the consequences were about to arrive with the force of a tidal wave. Sarah hung up the intercom phone and took a deep, steadying breath. She walked over to seats 2D and 2F, her expression devoid of any warmth or compromise. The professional mask of a flight attendant had been replaced by that of an official executing an order. "Mr. and Mrs. Hayes," she said, her voice clear and carrying through the silent cabin. "On the authority of the captain and by direct order from American Airlines corporate headquarters, your journey on this flight has been terminated." Caroline stared at her, her mouth agape. "Terminated? What are you talking about? You can't do that." "We can and we are," Sarah replied, her tone leaving no room for argument. "You have been deemed a security risk and a source of unacceptable disruption. Your actions toward a fellow passenger and crew member have violated the terms of carriage. The captain is currently making arrangements to return to the gate at JFK." The words, "return to the gate," echoed through the cabin. A collective sigh of frustration and relief went through the other passengers. They were going to be delayed, but the source of the poison was being excised. "Return to the gate." "Are you insane?" Caroline shrieked finally, understanding the magnitude of her miscalculation. "This is insane. I have a multi-million-dollar real estate deal in London. You can't just turn the plane around." Mark grabbed her arm, his face a ghostly white. He wasn't thinking about a real estate deal. He was thinking about his mortgage, his career, the name David Vance, and the catastrophic chain of events his wife had just unleashed. "Caroline, shut up," he hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. "Just be quiet. You've done enough." "The decision is final," Sarah said. "Please gather your personal belongings. We will be at the gate in approximately 15 minutes. Gate agents and airport security will meet you on the jet bridge to escort you from the aircraft." The mention of airport security was the final blow. The illusion of Caroline's power, her status, her entire curated identity evaporated in an instant. She was no longer a high-value customer. She was cargo being offloaded. The next 15 minutes were a masterclass in public humiliation. As the plane began its slow descent back toward the lights of Queens, Caroline and Mark had to stand up and retrieve their oversized bags from the overhead bin. Every eye in first and business class was on them. The silence was thick with judgment. The young man who had been filming lowered his phone, his job done. The footage was already being uploaded to a cloud server. Caroline, for the first time, seemed to shrink. Her designer clothes looked garish and cheap under the harsh glare of the cabin lights. Her defiant anger had curdled into a brittle, panicked despair. She fumbled with her bags, her hands shaking. Mark worked in grim, silent efficiency, his face a mask of shame. When the plane finally docked at the gate with a soft thud, the seatbelt sign pinged off. But no one moved. They all waited. The main cabin door opened, and 2 uniformed Port Authority police officers and a stern-looking gate supervisor stepped aboard. Caroline and Mark Hayes, the supervisor asked, her voice businesslike. Sarah pointed toward the couple. They're ready. The walk from seats 2D and 2F to the exit door was the longest walk of their lives. It was a walk of shame past the faces of the people they had inconvenienced and offended. As they passed seat 2A, Caroline couldn't help but glance at Dr. Vance. The elderly woman was not gloating. She was not smiling. She was simply looking at Caroline with an expression of profound, soul-wearying pity. In that moment, Caroline didn't see an adversary. She saw the dignified, graceful woman she had tried and failed to diminish. She saw the human cost of her own ugliness. Just as they reached the door, a man in seat 3A, the one who had lowered his newspaper in shock, began to clap. It was a slow, deliberate applause. Then the woman in 1F joined in. Soon the entire first-class cabin was filled with a wave of applause, not for the delay, but for the restoration of order and decency. It was a resounding communal verdict. As Caroline and Mark stepped onto the jet bridge flanked by police, they were met not just with official authority, but with the full crushing weight of their social disgrace. The door to the plane hissed shut behind them, sealing them out of the world they believed they commanded and into a new reality they had created for themselves. Aboard Flight 100, a sense of calm returned. Sarah made an announcement apologizing for the delay and explaining that they would be underway again shortly. As she walked back through the cabin, she paused at Dr. Vance's seat. "On behalf of the entire crew, Dr. Vance," she said quietly, "I want to apologize for what you experienced." Dr. Vance looked up and gave her a small, weary smile. "You have nothing to apologize for, Sarah. You handled it with professionalism. Thank you." The journey to London would be delayed by an hour, but for everyone on board, the price was worth it. They had witnessed something more than just airplane drama. They had seen a bully get exactly what she deserved, and they had seen it happen because a woman of quiet strength had refused to be broken. For Caroline and Mark Hayes, the nightmare was only beginning. Being escorted through JFK by police was just the first circle of a very modern hell. By the time they were formally deplaned and their luggage was unceremoniously dumped on a carousel, the video was already spreading like wildfire. The young tech entrepreneur had titled it, "Privileged Passenger Tells Elderly Black Woman to Go Back to Economy on AA 100. Big mistake," and he had posted it to Twitter, now X, and tagged several major news outlets. The clip was dynamite. It was short, visceral, and perfectly captured the raw entitlement of Caroline's tirade and the powerful, elegant composure of Dr. Vance's response. It didn't show the full, devastating intellectual takedown, but it didn't need to. It showed the ugliest part, the snarling command to go back. Before Flight 100 was even back over the Atlantic, Caroline Hayes was a trending topic. Internet sleuths with their terrifying efficiency had identified her within minutes. Her Instagram profile, a carefully curated shrine to her own success, became ground zero for a global onslaught of outrage. The picture of her pre-flight mimosa captioned, #BossBabe, London bound, and first-class life, was inundated with tens of thousands of comments. They were vicious, mocking, and merciless. "Economy looks pretty good right about now, doesn't it, Caroline?" one said. "This is what happens when your ego writes checks your character can't cash," said another. Her brand partnerships, the lifeblood of her influencer side hustle, evaporated overnight. La Roche, a luxury skincare brand she was a paid ambassador for, posted a statement before she had even found a hotel for the night. LaRoche is appalled by the behavior of Caroline Hayes in a recently circulated video. We have terminated our relationship with her effective immediately. Our brand is built on respect and inclusivity values, which Ms. Hayes has clearly demonstrated she does not share. Her real estate career was next. The high-end London brokerage she worked with as an affiliate issued its own press release by morning in the UK. They used words like shocked, unacceptable, and severing all ties. The Knightsbridge deal she had been so proud of, the one that was supposed to yield a record commission, was dead. The clients, a wealthy tech couple, had seen the video. There was no way they were going to be associated with her. But the most devastating karma was reserved for Mark. He sat in the grim silence of a JFK airport hotel room, watching his wife sob hysterically as she stared at her phone, watching her life's work of self-promotion crumble into digital dust. Then, his own phone rang. The caller ID read Robert Henderson, his CEO. Mark, Henderson's voice was cold-clipped. "I've just spent the last hour on the phone with David Vance's chief of staff, the CEO of Auratech. Do you know why?" Mark could barely breathe. "Robert, I can explain." "Don't," Henderson cut him off. "They sent me a link to a video of your wife screaming at an elderly woman. They told me that woman was Dr. Eleanor Vance, David Vance's mother." There was a long, terrifying silence on the line. "Our supply contract with Auratech is up for renewal in 3 months, Mark. It's worth $40 million a year to this company. It's the cornerstone of our entire division, your division." Henderson's voice was low and dangerous. "David Vance didn't make any threats. He's too smart for that. He just wanted to make sure I was aware of the character of the people I employ. Do you understand what he was telling me, Mark?" "Yes, Robert." Mark whispered, his throat tight. "You have until 9 a.m. Monday morning to tender your resignation," Henderson said. "If you don't, I will fire you for cause, and I will make sure the reason gross misconduct bringing the company into disrepute is noted in every reference check you ever get. We are done here, Mark. You are a liability I cannot afford." The line went dead. Mark lowered the phone, a profound numbness spreading through him. In the span of a few hours, they had lost everything. Her career, his career, their reputation, their carefully constructed world of status and success. It was all gone, wiped out by a few sentences of pure, unadulterated arrogance on a transatlantic flight. He looked over at his wife, who was now babbling about suing the airline, suing the man who filmed her, suing everyone. She still didn't get it. She was the architect of her own destruction. He thought of Dr. Vance's face, her look of pity. She hadn't wanted revenge. She had simply wanted respect. And in the pursuit of denying her that, Caroline had engineered a punishment more complete and catastrophic than anyone could have possibly designed. The karma wasn't just hard, it was absolute. As American Airlines Flight 100 began its final approach into London, a strange and profound quiet settled over the first-class cabin. It wasn't the tired pre-landing hush of a typical transatlantic journey. It was a silence of reverence, a shared space of reflection. The ugly outburst hours ago had been excised like a tumor, and in its place a sense of calm solidarity had grown. The other passengers who had boarded as strangers were now bound by a common experience. They had been witnesses not just to a moment of hateful prejudice, but to a powerful and dignified response that had affirmed a higher standard of human decency. Dr. Eleanor Vance watched the patchwork of England's green fields emerge from the morning mist. She felt a deep, bone-weary exhaustion, but it was mental, not physical. The adrenaline of the confrontation had long since faded, leaving behind the familiar ache of a battle she never wanted to fight, but could not in good conscience avoid. She hadn't sought to be a symbol or a hero. She had simply demanded the respect she was owed as a human being. The consequences that had cascaded from that simple demand were to her a source of grim necessity rather than triumphant celebration. When the wheels touched down on the tarmac at Heathrow, with a gentle bump and the engine spooled down, the captain's voice came over the intercom, not with the usual scripted welcome, but with a personal message. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are now at the gate. We know this has been an unusually eventful flight, and we thank you for your patience during the delay. We will be disembarking shortly." He paused, then added, "First-class passengers, please remain seated for one moment." A few seconds later, the cockpit door opened, and the captain, a distinguished man in his 50s with silvering temples named Captain Miller, emerged. He walked directly to seat 2A. He stood in the aisle, his hat in his hands, and addressed Dr. Vance, in a voice loud enough for the cabin to hear, yet intimate in its sincerity. "Dr. Vance," he began, his eyes meeting hers. "I'm Captain George Miller. I wanted to come out here and personally offer you my deepest apologies for what you were forced to endure on my aircraft. The behavior you were subjected to was inexcusable, and it has no place on this airline or, frankly, in our society. Your grace and composure under those circumstances were, frankly, remarkable. I've been flying for 30 years, and I've never seen a situation handled with such dignity. On behalf of my entire crew, we are honored to have had you on board." The other passengers listening intently broke into a soft but firm round of applause. It wasn't the raucous, vengeful applause from when the hazes were removed. This was a gesture of profound respect. Dr. Vance was visibly moved. A warm, genuine smile touched her lips. "Thank you, Captain Miller. That means a great deal. Your crew, especially Sarah and Liam, were exemplary." "They were following your lead, ma'am," he replied with a nod. He then stepped back. "The jet bridge is ready. Please allow us to let you disembark first." As Dr. Vance gathered her small leather satchel and her book, she felt the weight of the cabin's collective gaze, but it was no longer one of morbid curiosity. It was a look of admiration. She walked towards the open door, a woman of 72, who had in the space of a few hours become an accidental icon of grace under fire. The moment she stepped onto the jet bridge, she saw them. Her son, David, stood waiting, his face a mixture of relief and residual anger. And beside him, holding a hand-drawn picture of an airplane, was her granddaughter, Amelia, her face alight with the pure, uncomplicated joy that only a child can possess. "Grandma!" Amelia shrieked, breaking free from her father's hand and running full tilt into her grandmother's arms. Dr. Vance knelt, letting her satchel fall to the floor, and hugged the little girl with all her might, burying her face in her granddaughter's soft, braided hair. She breathed in the scent of shampoo and childhood, and in that instant the entire ugly episode on the plane dissolved into insignificance. This was real. This was why she had crossed an ocean. This was the world she fought for, a world where this child could grow up safe, loved, and respected. David reached them, placing a protective hand on his mother's shoulder. He looked down at them, his CEO mask gone, replaced by the simple, fierce love of a son. "Welcome to London, Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The contrast was stark and brutal. Hours earlier, another couple had been met on a jet bridge by uniformed police officers, their faces etched with shame and fury, their arrival a prelude to ruin. Now a grandmother was met by her family, her face etched with love, her arrival a moment of pure celebration. The same space, two vastly different destinies determined entirely by the content of their character. The ride to David's home in Holland Park was quiet at first. Amelia chattered on from her car seat, proudly explaining every detail of the drawing she had made for her grandmother. Dr. Vance listened, asking questions, and marveling at the crooked wings and smiling stick-figure passengers. It was a deliberate, gentle re-entry into a world of normalcy and love. Only after Amelia had dozed off, lulled by the motion of the car, did David speak of the incident. "I hope you don't mind, Mom. I took some steps." He began, his eyes on the road, but his attention entirely on her. "What did you do, David?" she asked, her voice calm. "I had my chief of staff get the CEO of American on the phone while your flight was still on the ground at JFK. I didn't yell, I didn't threaten, I just laid out the facts." He explained, his voice taking on the clipped precision of a corporate leader. "I told him that Oratech's brand is built on innovation, inclusivity, and respect. That's not just marketing, it's our core identity. We choose our partners based on a shared alignment of those values." I told him that an employee of one of our major suppliers had just witnessed his wife in a first-class cabin racially abuse my mother, a retired Columbia professor. I then asked him very calmly what that said about the environment his airline cultivates and the character of the companies in our shared ecosystem. "That was more than enough, I imagine," Dr. Vance said wryly. "It was," David confirmed. He was horrified. He personally authorized the return to gate and the lifetime ban. He also offered the donation. It wasn't me demanding it. It was damage control on his part. He knows that if a story like this gets out and the headline is, "Airline does nothing after CEO's mother is racially abused," his brand takes a multi-million-dollar hit. It's a sad truth, but sometimes the fastest path to justice is through a balance sheet. He then spoke of the second call. The man, Mark Hayes. My team looked him up. He's a VP of finance at a company called Omni Logistics. They're a mid-tier supplier for us. I had my staff reach out to their CEO, Robert Henderson. Same principle. I didn't demand he fire Mark. I simply made him aware that one of his senior managers was a participant in an event that stands in direct opposition to everything Oratech values in its partners. I suggested that he might want to reflect on whether that was the kind of leadership he wanted representing his company in the marketplace. Dr. Vance listened, her brow furrowed. "You cost that man his job, David." "No, Mom," he replied, his voice firm but respectful. "His wife cost him his job, and his silence while she did it cost him his job. He stood there and let it happen. He enabled it. In the corporate world, that's just as bad as committing the act yourself. It speaks to a profound lack of judgment and courage. The world I operate in has no room for that. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it because a cancer like that can't be allowed to fester in my company's orbit. It was a business decision." Dr. Vance was silent for a long time, watching the elegant townhouses of London glide past. "When you were a boy," she said softly, "do you remember that trip we took to South Carolina? To see your great-aunt?" "I remember." David set his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "The man at the gas station who wouldn't let us use the restroom." "And what did I do?" "You looked him in the eye," David recalled, "and you calmly explained the public accommodations section of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. You quoted the case law. He was so stunned he just stepped aside and let us in." "I used the tools I had, David," she said. "Knowledge, history, the law. Today on that plane I used them again. You used your tools. Power, influence, money. They are much bigger, much sharper tools. Be careful with them. They can build things, but they can also cause destruction far beyond your intent." "I know, Mom," he said, his voice softening. "You taught me that. But you also taught me to stand up to bullies. Caroline Hayes was a bully, and the system she relies on, status, wealth, privilege, was the only thing she understood. So I used the language of that system to speak to her, It was the only way she and people like her would ever truly hear. Back at the airport hotel near JFK, the language Caroline and Mark Hayes were hearing was one of catastrophic failure. The room was a mess of discarded clothes and room service trays. The argument had been burning for hours, a toxic circular fire of blame and recrimination. "How could you just stand there?" Caroline shrieked, pacing the threadbare carpet, her phone clutched in her hand like a grenade. "You just let her talk to me like that. You let them all laugh at me. You're my husband. You were supposed to defend me." Mark, who had been sitting catatonically on the edge of the bed, finally snapped. He shot to his feet, his face a mottled red, a stranger to the usually placid, apologetic man. "Defend you? Defend what, Caroline? Your right to be a racist monster. Your right to humiliate an old woman and scream at a flight attendant. I have spent 15 years of my life defending you. Defending your spending, defending your snobbery, defending your need to treat every waiter and assistant like they're dirt beneath your feet, and for what? So you could finally go too far and nuke our entire lives from orbit." "This isn't my fault," she sobbed, the tears a mixture of rage and self-pity. "That woman, she provoked me, and that kid with the phone. This is an invasion of privacy. I'm going to sue everyone." "Sue them with what, Caroline?" Mark laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "Henderson fired me. My career is over. They're not even letting me resign. They're firing me for cause. No severance, nothing. Your brokerage dropped you. LaRoche dropped you. Your so-called followers are sending you death threats. We are radioactive. No one will touch us. We are pariahs." He snatched the phone from her hand and threw it against the wall where it shattered. "Stop looking at it. It's over. The life we had is over." Caroline stared at the broken phone, then at her husband's contorted face. For the first time, the reality of their situation pierced through her narcissistic haze. It wasn't just a bad day or a PR crisis she could manage. It was the end. The foundation of sand Dr. Vance had spoken of had been washed away, and they were in freefall. She thought of her perfect white sneakers now sitting by the door and imagined them covered in mud. She sank onto the floor, the fight draining out of her, replaced by a cold, terrifying emptiness. The silence in the room was no longer about anger. It was the sound of absolute ruin, miles away and an ocean apart in a sun-drenched London kitchen. Vance sat at a large wooden table, watching Amelia carefully color in the airplane drawing she had made. The child had chosen a bright, happy yellow for the plane's body and a rainbow for its wings. In Amelia's world, airplanes were magical things that brought grandmothers home. David placed a steaming cup of tea in front of his mother. He looked at the drawing, then at his mother's peaceful face. He saw no lingering trace of the battle she had fought, only the serene contentment of her arrival. "You know, Mom," he said quietly, "for all their money and status, the Hayeses of the world are the poorest people I know." Dr. Vance looked at her granddaughter, who was humming a little tune as she colored. She reached out and tucked a stray braid behind Amelia's ear. "Indeed," she said, her voice filled with a quiet, unshakable certainty. "Because they don't have this. And this, my darling son, is the only first class that has ever truly mattered." And so Caroline Hayes learned the hard way that the world is much smaller than it seems, and the person you choose to belittle might just be connected to the very foundations of the world you've built. This story isn't just about a satisfying moment of karma. It's a powerful reminder of the hidden strength that lies in dignity and the quiet power of refusing to let hatred have the final word. Dr. Eleanor Vance didn't need to scream to be heard. Her legacy, her character, and the love of her family spoke volumes more than any angry retort ever could. If this story of justice and quiet strength resonated with you, Please take a moment to hit that like button to help us share it with more people. Consider sharing it with someone who might appreciate a story where decency wins. And of course, if you want to hear more true stories of dramatic encounters and real-life karma, make sure you subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. Thank you for listening.